Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Recovery Talk. So this week I want to talk about why you probably shouldn't get your wellness advice from TikTok. And I want to talk a bit about social media wellness trends and give a bit of a critical eye to some of the patterns I see across social media platforms when it comes to advice around food, body movement, mental health, physical health, stress reduction, etc. And how a lot of times things may come across as being about wellness, but then it actually is about something else. So when I say TikTok wellness trends, I'm not just talking about things from the platform TikTok. I'm also talking about YouTube or Facebook Reels or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, Twitter. I mean, what else do we got now? I think those were the main platforms. Even podcasts, honestly, listen to podcasts with a critical ear as well. But more than anything, I'm talking about typical wellness content where someone posts like a video content like 5 tips to reduce your cortisol levels or 10 signs that you have too high blood sugar, all of these things that we see quite a lot floating around on social media. So I actually went to a yoga class with a friend of mine the other day. It was one of those like really gentle, slow yoga classes where you're kind of just sitting there and listening to like sound bath and doing some very gentle stretches. So it was quite nice, even though I'm not a big fan of exercise classes or any activity done in a group. I'm like, I could have done this alone. But anyways, I was there and yeah, it was pretty nice. It was nice at least being in a room where the movement is not about burning calories or achieving some form of goals. It was just about relax, let go. So yeah, that was at least a nice thing, I think. I think it should be more movement like that. Anyways, after this class, I don't know how we got into it, but my friend mentioned something about like stress, and she said something along the lines of, oh my god, like cortisol something. And I was like, what is it with cortisol these days? Why is everyone suddenly so obsessed with cortisol? Like, this is a new thing. And then she said, I think it has to do with weight loss. And I was like, oop, yep. And it got me thinking at something that I had seen on social media that had popped up, where suddenly there was so much content on regulating your cortisol levels, which, yes, of course, it's an important thing because cortisol is essentially our stress hormone. So regulating that, making sure that you have a healthy stress levels essentially is very, very important for mental and physical well-being. But I believe part of the reason why there is so much focus on this specific hormone is because it is a hormone that is associated, if it is in high levels, with weight gain. And it made me question how many of the videos on quote-unquote regulating your cortisol, which by the way is done through relaxation, having sufficient sleep, not running on stress hormones and black coffee, actually having a breakfast, getting some sunlight, just basic self-care things that of course are going to make people feel a lot better mentally and physically. But why was it that this specific hormone had suddenly taken off? And before that, it was about the thyroid and having a good thyroid, because again, what is having a low thyroid is associated with weight gain. Interestingly enough, an eating disorder and excessive restriction will also tend to lower your thyroid, which can confuse some people with thinking they actually have hypothyroidism when it actually is, the eating disorder is lowering levels there. So just a heads up about that. And interestingly enough, cortisol levels tend to be elevated in people with restrictive eating disorders because guess what? Running on too little food, very bad sleep, we know eating disorders negatively affect sleep, intensive exercise instead of more gentle movement or full rest. A lot of these things are things that spike your cortisol levels. And when you talk to people with eating disorders, a lot of times it's almost like they are addicted to that rush, the adrenaline rush, and being in a stressed state, not knowing that how harmful that is for the mental and physical state. But it makes me a little bit question things when this seems like the motivation to fix something is immediately to do because it is associated with weight gain if you don't, right? It reminds me a bit sometimes when I talk to people who are really interested in metabolic healing, which of course I'm like, yay, of course, that's awesome. Like of course we want your metabolism to heal, especially if you have a metabolism that's been slowed down through an eating disorder. Of course we want to normalize that. But I always make sure to be a bit like, Is this your eating disorder that just wants you to make sure that you're not quote unquote gaining too much weight? Like, is it, if weight had nothing to do with any of these things, how much would you care about them? And it made me think of the people who will see this kind of content about, for example, what to do for good cortisol levels. Also, sometimes people who probably have completely normal cortisol levels, but influencers know that right now it's a little bit of a trending one, so they really latch onto that. And they are seeing this and they're kind of ironically creating more stress by now panicking about their cortisol level and doing everything perfectly for optimal health. When maybe just having that coffee and just chilling out and having that coffee would probably have relaxed them more, rather than feeling like they must like metabolism hack their way through their morning. Essentially, stressing about your health is not going to give you better health, because stress is one of the worst things there is for our health, more than any food or any kind of movement or no movement ever could do. Chronic stress is really, really bad for us. So the cortisol hackers, they're onto something, but immediately I see diet culture latching onto it and making it into something it's not. Another thing that I often see is health advice that is meant to a generalized audience, rather than health advice that is meant to people with eating disorders. Yet the advice is disproportionately being seen and taken very seriously by people with eating disorders, the people who the advice is not intended for. So for example, if someone is, let's say, type 2 diabetic, there's a lot of advice around how to lower your blood sugar and just making sure you don't have those glucose spikes that we see in type 2 diabetes. So information about how to kind of hack things a little bit in terms of how you eat and move to help better regulate that can be incredibly helpful if you have type 2 diabetes. The problem is that people with eating disorders will often go in there and take health advice that is not intended for their psychological and metabolic health. And also, I think that sometimes influencers, they start kind of widening the scope a lot, right? So maybe they started out as specialized in, let's say, type 2 diabetes, but then they start widening it to mean everyone who has some little bit of a higher than average blood sugar levels, maybe someone with even like the mildest cases of insulin resistance, maybe someone with PCOS. They start like widening the scope so much that it includes like 70% of the population in their head, essentially to make their message more applicable for a larger audience. And I've seen this a lot, especially there's one influencer that I will not name that I just have, I don't know why she just annoys me so much. I think it's because I've had clients come to me with some of her content being terrified, and then I have to come and clean up the mess, right? Where she's essentially, she's talking about these glucose spikes and why that's like the worst thing ever. Literally, like she described it to essentially cooking your body alive, like you're being cooked alive if you have a blood sugar response to eating. And it's like, that's not true. That's like, thankfully a lot of doctors have fact checked her, but essentially her advice would be really, really good for someone with, let's say, type 2 diabetes. And then she kind of started out giving the advice more to people who would benefit from it because they have an abnormal glucose response to foods. But then it was like, aha, that's not enough. I'm going to make this a thing that everyone should care about, everyone should listen to. And suddenly you have people with restrictive eating disorders who are undernourished being terrified that having a bowl of pasta is going to send them straight into metabolic dysfunction. And a lot of times these influencers, they will cite studies, right? And I'm not saying that citing studies is a bad thing. You know, I love a good citing of studies, but it's important to be aware that people with all sorts of nutritional backgrounds will at one point have one study that they will cite that will claim that their diet or their wellness approach or their movement approach is the best one, which is why it's really important to see the bigger picture and also to know your own tendencies and to ask yourself, well, is this intended for someone with my mental and physical health? Intermittent fasting is a good example of this. I mean, I think intermittent fasting now has kind of gone past its peak. There was a point where that was like the coolest thing you could do, but then more and more people were like, actually, it's not that great. And it kind of, I don't know, it lost its trend a little bit, but that is a good example where those people, they will have studies that they will show you, and that can be so convincing, but you have to ask yourself, does this work for you? for your psychological profile, for what your body is physically going through right now. Is adding in more periods of an energetic deficit going to help your specific situation? And is this a healthy area for you to focus on? Is focusing on the perfect way to regulate every single metabolic process you have in your body at all times, is that for you a genuine just wish to be well? Or is it rooted in some kind of eating disorder pathology where it's that orthorexic side of you wanting to do things perfect, wanting to know everything, wanting to almost use it as a safety behavior, where it's like, okay, yeah, I can order the pizza, but only if I have 15 peer-reviewed studies that shows it's okay that I do that. And I think this especially is important for me to share with my audience, because I know that the people who gravitate towards listening to podcasts like mine are people who probably like to consume information, to consume psychoeducation. And don't get me wrong, that can be a really helpful thing if you're able to apply that knowledge to your life in a way that works for you. And this is why I don't want to completely slander a lot of these wellness influencers, because if there are people who generally struggle with certain things and this person has some really good free strategies to help that, that's awesome. But what I do tend to see as someone who works with people with eating disorders is that they get sucked into these loops where it actually ends up causing more physical and mental harm to hyper-focus on everything related to wellness. And it doesn't make them more well. It makes them sicker. Or it just keeps them stuck because there's suddenly so much conflicting information out there and they have a hard time sorting the fact from fiction. And also even within the field of science, there isn't one consensus of what health is, what the perfect diet is, what the perfect way of moving is. But what I will say though, is that it is pretty uncontroversial in the field of eating disorders that people who are struggling with restrictive eating disorders, they probably don't need more high-intensity exercise. They probably don't need more restriction or more taking away food. They probably don't need more focus on that to begin with. So I want you to keep that in mind when navigating this ocean of different information. Keep in mind that a lot of this is not intended for people with restrictive eating disorders. And that a lot of these people, they may start in a niche, but then eventually they're spreading their niche so much that their niche includes the whole population, which is really good for business. Suddenly, everyone should be obsessed about their cortisol levels or about their glucose spikes, which, by the way, is completely normal after you eat a meal to have a glucose spike. That's just how it works. Yes, if you are diabetic, if you have some sort of impairment in your body's ability to regulate your blood sugar, of course you're going to have to think about these things. But I see people who have no problem with that, who are suddenly obsessing about something and actually ironically creating more stress for themselves, creating more ill health for themselves. And I sometimes wonder, do these influencers realize how much of their content is being viewed by people who shouldn't view it? And could they do a better job at making clear, like, hey, by the way, this is not for you guys? I think they could. I think that making people stressed out about food in a society that's already doing that enough, I don't think that's good. And I think the people that they think they're reaching with this nutritional content is not the people that they're actually reaching. People who never cared about the nutritional content in any food, they're not suddenly going to start watching this. But the people who are really anxious about it are probably going to be the people gravitated the most towards it. And I think that so often when doing like psychoeducation or wellness education, it's important to keep in mind that even health advice that could have a good effect on someone's physical health in theory can in practice end up causing a lot of distress. It makes me think about a situation that I had with my dog before she passed. So my dog had cancer, and the cancer had basically ruined her pancreas, so she could not regulate her blood sugar. And she would get these episodes of severely low blood sugar where she would faint and convulse. It was horrifying. So what I had to do, I had to always be very, very aware of her diet, of regulating her blood sugar, and looking for signs that her blood sugar was dropping too low. And I remember asking the vet, like, hey, should I get a continuous blood sugar monitor for her? So a continuous blood sugar monitor is something, it's like a little blood sugar monitor that you have on you, or in this case on a dog, 24/7, so that you can always monitor their blood sugar and where they're at. And I know this tool can be incredibly helpful for some people with diabetes, for example, but it can also become really obsessive and stressful. And this is what my vet said. He said essentially that you could do that, but you have to also keep in mind how much stress it's going to cause you to constantly feel that hypervigilance of needing to check it, looking at the numbers, becoming too perfectionistic. And I really appreciated that he told me that, because I knew that that is a tendency that I have. I love my dog. I'm obsessed with my dog. I was devastated when she passed, and I wanted to do everything for her. And I think he could see that as well, that I was someone who maybe could get a little bit too obsessive with this. And he actually said that you have to keep this in mind. Maybe it actually is not really that good for your mental health. And I actually ended up not getting it. Instead, just kind of monitoring her and doing the best that I could and accepting that I was going to be a good enough dog owner rather than an absolutely perfect one. And that made me think of something similar that I heard when I did a webinar with BEAT, the eating disorder organization here in the UK, on type 1 diabetes and eating disorders. And this was one of the key takeaways from that. They spoke about not getting perfectionistic with your bloods and your numbers and making it to be perfect and just really beating yourself up when the numbers are not perfect. And I thought that was so powerful, because society will always tell the opposite, right? It needs to be perfect. You need to, almost like your health is this like video game that if you just crack the code, it will be 100% perfect and predictable. But any of us who are chronically ill or have struggled with some kind of health condition, we often know that it is very unpredictable, very random. You can do all the right things and still feel like crap, and you can do all the wrong things and suddenly have a really good period. And then I saw advertisements for continuous glucose monitors for people without diabetes, just so they could make their diet perfect and find the foods, like how they responded to every food, so they can start eliminating things. And I was like, this can't be healthy. Thankfully, a lot of people had called that out. A lot of doctors had been saying like, hey, this is actually not necessary for people who are not diabetic or not prone to diabetes. They shouldn't have to constantly obsess about these things. It can actually be a pathway towards disordered eating. And I was really appreciating that people spoke about that, because for me, that was just so shocking. Like, even my vet for my dying dog was concerned that this may actually not be, like, the mental aspects of it might actually outweigh any benefit. And here you are marketing this towards people. And again, what kind of people would naturally gravitate the most towards this? Yes, diabetics may gravitate towards it, and it can absolutely be a helpful tool for them. But then I was thinking, how many people with eating disorders are going to gravitate towards this as another way to control and obsess over food and health without actually getting any health gains? I think what scares me about social media, and also why I'm actually not spending a lot of time on social media. Now it seems from this episode that I'm just here all day researching, but it's more, I will end up in these loops where I'll watch one thing and suddenly something else comes, and then I will rage watch it because I get really annoyed and frustrated and think, oh my God, I need to talk about this in my podcast. The algorithm will detect, oh, Amalie rage watched this thing about blood glucose monitors. She wants more of it. And then I'm like, And I have to be really strict with myself to just skip it immediately. So be mindful when navigating social media that the algorithm gives you more of what you're engaging with. Your watch time, more than anything, is what matters. Just because you reported something or you were angry when you watched it and was reading all the comments, the algorithm just sees that you spent a lot of time engaging with this content and gives you more of it. The best thing you can do is skip. I just think it's scary how quickly it slides out. Like, I started watching a few things on like nervous system regulation, which is incredibly interesting topic. We're still learning so much about that, how it works. And overall, there were some people who had some really good stress reduction strategies that I really enjoyed. But then so quickly, it's like the algorithm realized that, oh, this person's into wellness. And then suddenly was like, oh, don't eat sugar and don't do this and don't do that. And I was like, this is not what I came here for. Thankfully, I have a very critical eye when I consume this kind of content. I also have a research background, so I can I have a tendency to be able to spot patterns, see the bigger picture. But most people see this and they don't give it the same critical eye. And that's not because they're not smart or anything. It's just that it's not necessarily their training, in the same way that I'm not a good plumber, I'm not a good accountant. Someone shows me their accountancy overview, I'm not going to be able to spot any errors with it because I don't know that much about it. But for most people, they're going to see someone who maybe has a stethoscope, or they're citing a study on rats becoming addicted to sugar like it was cocaine, and they're going to run with it. And if they have an eating disorder, they are especially going to be more prone to taking this information very seriously, and they're going to be prone to saving information in their brain that fits the eating disorder's narrative. So even if the next reel was something about the importance of rest, if the reel before it was about high intensity fasted exercise, that's what's going to really stick to their heads. So instead of trying to find the perfect wellness information, maybe you should instead just focus more on doing things that make you feel good. Maybe just going outside, getting some sun, making yourself a nice home-cooked dinner, having a good night's sleep, spending time with the people you love. You don't necessarily need social media to tell you that these things are good for you. You don't necessarily need there to be a scientific study backing this up, which, by the way, there is. So less learning about doing and more doing, because in the process of learning about doing, there's a good chance that there's going to be some harm involved because of all the other content you're going to have to sither through in order to get to the things that give you some good advice. And even in the good advice, there may be something that is just not that great, or something that is more oriented towards someone who don't have an eating disorder. So maybe you hear something about, for example, anxiety, managing anxiety, and one of the recommended advices would be exercise, and you're in a position where you're actually recovering from compulsive movement and you don't need more exercise. It's just so important to have that critical thinking ability to be like, okay, that part of it is not for me. I'm going to take what fits and leave what doesn't. This is also part of reading comprehension, right, which we all learned in school. Part of reading comprehension is learning about what kind of content is intended for which people. Sometimes there may be things coming up that I'm like, okay, this content is just not intended for me. And we all know how annoying it is when someone is like, what about this? What about that? What about me? What about my unique situation? So as much as I think that people with eating disorders should be more thought of in this kind of content, and influencers should have more thought about how it affects people, you probably are better off just taking a step back instead of trying to always educate and correct. Know your tendencies. I know I've said that probably quite a few episodes now, but it's like one of the most important things I teach clients is know your tendencies and know where you're at. For example, if I have a client that is just fully recovered now and is just in the end stages and we're about to wrap it up, and that person is like, oh, I would like to work on some stress regulation strategies, they may be more able to handle to go through some of the BS that may pop up because they won't be as easily triggered. But if you're someone in the depths of your eating disorder, you probably would be better off just throwing your phone away, fill up your fridge, and take it easy. Because by looking for the one true answer, you're going to drive yourself insane. The closest thing you'll get to a one true answer is by using your own experience on what works for you and what doesn't, and by consuming content that's actually meant for you. I'm by no means saying that all the recovery content out there is amazing, but what I am saying is that content is probably going to be more content there that you can resonate with that actually keeps you in mind. And when it comes to things such as wellness and stress reduction and joyful movement, these are wonderful things. Just be a little bit critical of your own motivations behind them and also the sources. Are they trying to take really niche things and make it into something that should be everybody's problem? Are they pathologizing normal human functioning, such as having a glucose response after you eat something with carbohydrates, or having normal fluctuations in your cortisol levels? Heck, even experiencing a little bit of stress now and then is part of being a human being, is part of what makes us get things done. It's okay in small amounts. The problem is when your entire life is spent in a stress state where you're just jumping from one thing to another and can't relax. Because I just see a pattern in the online wellness spaces and TikTok and other places where, again, like I said, they're trying to make things applicable for a larger audience. And to do that, they're taking very normal things and making them abnormal. Good example of this would be a gut health influencer who would say something like, if you don't have 2 to 3 bowel movements per day, you're constipated and you need to eat more fiber. Buy my high fiber gut friendly diet for your solution. Which, first of all, it is not true that if you don't have 2 to 3 bowel movements per day, you're constipated. That's absolute BS, pun intended. And second of all, if you are a person with a restrictive eating disorder, there's a good chance you already are kind of overdoing it on the fiber and the vegetables already. And adding in more of that will not really help constipation, where the underlying cause is not a low fiber diet, but actually energetic suppression. The amount of times I work with clients who come from a background of extremely high fiber diets and still having constipation, and then they increase their overall calorie intake and even eat less vegetables, and they eat more fats and they eat white bread, and then they're like, my digestion is a lot better. What is this? I can do an episode about the digestion paradox and eating disorders, and how a lot of the gut health advice you see online is not intended for people with restrictive eating disorders at some future point. And again, it's that thing of, if you are someone who has never heard of eating a vegetable and you're very constipated, of course that advice may help you. But these influencers should know, in my opinion, that a lot of the people who will listen to this advice and take it very seriously will be restrictive eaters who are already hyper-focused on having the perfect diet. And then they try these things and it doesn't work, and they beat themselves up, they create more stress, which then worsens, ironically, the physical symptoms that the advice was supposed to fix. And instead of being critical towards the advice and being like, hey, I don't think this works for me, they're critical towards themselves. My body must be broken if this doesn't work for me. I must be faulty for not having the willpower to stick out all of these wellness hacks. If I just research a bit more and learn a bit more and do a bit better, everything will be fine. When ironically, a lot of time what you need is less focus on it, less perfectionism, less learning, and just do the things. Have the pizza out with friends. Skip that 6 a.m. run. And quitting the tracking, whether it is of every macro and micronutrient you're eating, your weight, your calories, your steps, your workouts, less tracking and more living. Because at the end of the day, we are here to live. We're not here to hack our health the perfect way, right? Yes, of course we should take care of our health. Obviously. So much of my podcast is about optimizing your own mental and physical health through eating disorder recovery, which is one of the healthiest thing you can do if you're someone with restrictive eating disorder. But there is a point where you're going to have to say, okay, I was not put on this earth to eat the perfect diet, to do the perfect movement, to have the perfect body. I am here to live, to enjoy, to find my purpose. Whether that is a big thing or just small things that make you happy. And I think so many times people feel really empty, so they get drawn towards wellness culture to fill that gap, especially if they maybe are at a point where they're recovering from their eating disorder and they're letting go of their eating disorder. Then it's like, okay, what now? Okay, I've been hyper-focusing on being thin my whole life. Now I need to hyper-focus on being healthy. And this is why you see such an over-representation of people with eating disorders in wellness culture. Because it is familiar, right? It is like, okay, now I can actually control my food and my exercise, but I can do it in a way where nobody's going to accuse me of being unhealthy. They're instead going to say, wow, you have so much knowledge and willpower, teach me. And I do understand there is nuance here, especially for people with certain chronic health conditions, where a lot of these things you do have to think about. For example, if you have celiac disease, unfortunately, you are going to have to check then when you go out to eat, there's going to be something gluten-free there. But what I see again and again is people who do not have certain health condition eating and moving as if they do without getting any health benefits. And then when they don't really feel better in the bigger picture, they are instead just finding something else to focus on, something else to hack, something else that is wrong with their bodies. Oh, whoa, I had a little bit of a breakout there. What went wrong? Something is wrong. I need to fix it. It's like the brain is addicted to solving problems. And if you have a brain that's primed that way, that can be a huge advantage if you're using it for good. You could probably do very well if you went into some kind of academic direction or research, or, I don't know, becoming a private detective. But these traits is also what can lead you into becoming extremely obsessive with wellness without getting the actual wellness. Or something that can lead you into work burnout. So I would say keep that in mind as well. Anyway, guys, key takeaway from this episode is, like I said again, you have to know yourself and what is right for your own mental and physical health. If you are a compulsive exerciser and you read online advice suggesting that the solution to all your problem is just more exercise, that's like, exercise is as good as an SSRI. No, it's not for people with compulsive exercise. Rest is their SSRI. But as someone with the restrictive eating disorders, you have problems that go against the mainstream, Most people do not have a problem that they are exercising too much, but people with restrictive eating disorders tend to do. And when you're navigating social media, why not make that a space that is not about those things? How about instead making it about something that you're really interested in that has nothing to do with food, body, and movement? This is something I'm very mindful of personally. Of course, my algorithm will immediately go into wellness content because I am, per the algorithm, considered to be a wellness person. So immediately I get that stuff, and it's honestly quite annoying. But instead of just frothing at the mouth over the influencer who said that sugar gives you dementia, or my personal favorite, when you get like one vegan influencer and then the next one is a carnivore, or it is a carnivore that used to be a vegan, or vice versa. Because notice how often people go again from one to another, right? It's like there's no middle ground. You either are a vegan or you are eating only meat. There's no flexibility, no in between, right? Just different sides of the same coins, really. So instead of being angry at this content, I just try and spend time with the things that I do like, right? It's a little bit of that thing of like you get more of what you focus on. That is definitely true when it comes to social media algorithms. And even better, put your phone away. I don't think anyone has been like, wow, I'm so glad I spent all of that time browsing on TikTok. Yes, you will eventually maybe get up one little smart little hack or something that made you laugh a lot. But imagine, think about how many frogs you have to kiss to get there, right? How much crap content you're going to have to get through the good parts. And then at the end of the day, as the good outweighing the bad, that's what you have to ask yourself. And I can't answer that for you, but what I can say is for the majority of people, they have tend to felt a lot better by taking more time away from social media. I don't think our brains are meant to handle the amount of information that we're getting. And when it comes to things relating to your own health, you probably would be better off working with someone who knows eating disorders, who can maybe help you guide a bit like, okay, is this really good for you? So maybe instead of jumping into another diet, maybe talking a bit with your therapist, for example, like, is taking away more things from my diet really the productive solution for someone in my situation? And maybe ask yourself, would I have recommended this action to someone else in my situation? Because I see so many people with eating disorders that are very eager to find another food to blame and take away more food and add in more movement for themselves. But if they had someone in their life that was in their shoes, they would be like, absolutely not. If it was about wellness, you would have wanted the people you care about to do these things as well. And if not, that probably is a sign that it's not really as simple as I just want to be healthy. Health is not one thing. What is healthy for one person can be unhealthy for another. Health is super individual, and online wellness culture does not have the sole answer to what it is. So have a critical eye when you are consuming this content, or even better, take a bit of a step away, especially if you notice that it's having a negative effect on you. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, feel free to leave a rating for this podcast or share it with maybe someone who needs to hear this. Have a good day, and I will see you guys in the next episode.